The Savoy was the most elegant restaurant in the city, with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling like frozen drops of light, tables covered with immaculate white linen tablecloths, and silverware that reflected the soft glow of candle flames. The scent of expensive wine and French sauces hung in the air. It was a busy Saturday night, and among the tables moved Andrew Silver, a 23-year-old waiter, too thin for his height, his black and white uniform impeccably ironed despite having been mended 3 times. His hands trembled slightly as he balanced the tray with champagne flutes, not from first-time nerves but from pure exhaustion. Andrew's wife, Maria, was 8 months pregnant, and he had been working double shifts for weeks to save enough money for the delivery and the baby's layette. His brown eyes had deep, dark circles, but he smiled politely at every customer, his voice always gentle, always respectful. That's when Richard Almeida entered the restaurant. The entire dining room seemed to pause for a second. Richard was 42 years old, with an athletic build maintained by expensive personal trainers, dark hair combed back with imported gel, and a navy blue suit that cost more than Andrew's annual salary. His Rolex gleamed on his wrist, and he carried that air of superiority that only a combination of money and arrogance can create. 3 feet behind him was his girlfriend of the moment, Brittany, a 25-year-old blonde model in a tight red dress, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. Richard snapped his fingers as if calling a dog. "You! Waiter! Table for 2, the best in the house." Andrew approached with the respectful posture he had learned in his months working there. "Good evening, sir. Of course, please follow me. We have an excellent table near the—" "I didn't ask for your opinion," Richard cut him off, his voice rough. "Just take us to the best table, and be quick. My time is worth more than your entire life." Andrew swallowed the humiliation, maintaining his professional composure. He led the couple to the corner table by the window, with a view of the illuminated city. He pulled out the chair for Brittany, who didn't even look at him, too busy on her phone. He handed them the menus. "Our specials today are—" "Bring us the most expensive bottle of wine you have," Richard interrupted again, not even looking at Andrew. "And if it takes more than 5 minutes, I'll complain to your manager and make sure you're fired. Understood, creature?" Creature. The word cut like glass. Andrew clenched his fists for a second, then relaxed. He needed this job. Maria depended on him. The baby depended on him. "Yes, sir. I'll be right back." Andrew returned with the bottle of wine, a Chateau Margaux costing $1,200. His hands still trembled from exhaustion as he presented the label as protocol required. "Sir, your Chateau Margaux 2015, an exceptional vintage with notes of—" "I didn't ask for a lesson, I asked you to serve it," Richard snarled. "Are you stupid or just pretending?" Brittany laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Honey, take it easy. He's doing the best he can. Not everyone had an education like us." Her condescension was worse than Richard's direct insult. Andrew opened the bottle, his hands now trembling from humiliation as well as exhaustion. He poured the wine into the glasses, careful not to spill a drop. "Would you like me to describe the specials?" Andrew tried, keeping his voice steady. "You know what?" Richard leaned back in his chair, looking Andrew up and down with disdain. "Just bring me the most expensive dish on the menu. Don't even bother explaining. I doubt you understand real food. You probably eat rice and eggs every day, right?" Andrew felt his face burn. Rice and eggs were exactly what he had eaten for lunch, and for dinner the day before, and probably what he would eat tomorrow too. "Perfect, sir. I'll be right back with your orders." But as Andrew turned to leave, Richard did something that crossed all lines. He deliberately stuck out his foot, making Andrew trip. The waiter fell to his knees on the marble floor, the empty tray clattering with a crash that made the whole restaurant look. Laughter. Richard laughed loudly, slapping the table. Brittany laughed too, covering her mouth with her long, red-nailed hands. Other customers looked on with pity, some with disgust, but no one said anything. No one ever said anything. Andrew got up slowly, his knees burning, his dignity in tatters, his eyes filled with tears that he blinked back furiously. He couldn't cry. Not here, not in front of them. "I'm sorry, sir," Andrew whispered, because that's what he had to say. He was always the one at fault. He always had to apologize. "You're pathetic," Richard said, wiping imaginary tears from laughing so hard. "Look at you, what kind of man are you? Can't even stay on your feet. How do you expect to support a family like that?" Andrew froze. How did he know? Richard noticed the surprise and smiled cruelly. "Oh, you thought I didn't notice. The cheap wedding band on your finger? The crumpled photo in your wallet that fell when you tripped? I saw it all. You're married, and I bet you have a baby on the way by the look of desperation on your face. Poor bastard. That kid was born a loser. Something broke inside Andrew at that moment. Not visibly, not externally, but deeply. A part of him that still had hope, that still believed the world could be fair, died there on the marble floor of the Savoy. But he didn't answer. He didn't react. He just picked up the tray, stood up completely, and went to place their order. Because he needed the job. Because Maria depended on him. Because the baby depended on him. The rest of the night was torture. Richard found 1,000 ways to humiliate him. He complained the food was cold, even though it was perfect. He complained the wine was warm, even though it was at the ideal temperature. He deliberately spilled water and demanded Andrew clean it up immediately. He called the manager 3 times to complain, always with false accusations. When they finally left at 11:30, Richard left 0 tip. Just a note on a paper napkin with one word written, pathetic. Andrew took the note, crumpled it in his trembling hands and went to the staff bathroom. He locked himself in a stall and finally, let the tears fall. He cried silently, biting his own fist to make no noise, his body shaking with sobs he had been holding back for hours. When he got home at midnight, Maria was awake, waiting. She saw her husband's face and knew immediately. What happened? Nothing, Andrew lied, forcing a smile. Just a tiring day, that's all. But Maria knew him too well. She hugged him tightly, and he broke down again, telling her everything between tears. The tripping, the laughter, the humiliations, the word on the napkin. He's worthless, Maria said fiercely. A real man isn't measured by the money he has, but by the dignity he carries. And you have more dignity in your pinky finger than he has in his entire body. But he was right, Andrew whispered. I am pathetic. I can't even protect my own family from— Stop, Maria cut him off, holding his face in her hands. You work 3 shifts to give us the best. You endure humiliation to put food on the table. You love, you care, you are present. That's not pathetic. That's heroic. Andrew wanted to believe her. He wanted to feel it was true. But Richard's words echoed louder. That kid was born a loser. That night Andrew barely slept. He lay staring at the cracked ceiling of the tiny apartment, listening to Maria breathing beside him, feeling the baby's little kicks when he placed his hand on her belly, and he made a silent promise. This child would not be a loser. No matter what it cost, no matter how many humiliations Andrew had to swallow, this child would have chances. He would have an education. He would have dignity. He would have everything Andrew never had. The following months were the hardest of Andrew's life. Maria had complications with the pregnancy and needed absolute bed rest. Mrs. Celia tried to help, but her diabetes had worsened, requiring more medication, more care. Andrew worked like never before. Double shifts at the Savoy, Uber gigs in the early hours, food deliveries in the early morning. He slept 3, sometimes 2 hours a night. He visibly lost weight, the bones in his face becoming more pronounced, his eyes increasingly sunken. But he continued, because there was no alternative. The baby was born on a rainy Tuesday night 3 weeks early. A boy, small but healthy, with huge brown eyes and a strong cry that filled the hospital room. Andrew held him for the first time, with hands trembling with emotion, tears falling on his son's tiny face. Welcome, Michael, he whispered. Daddy promises you will have everything. Everything I didn't have. You won't go through what I went through. I promise. But promises, Andrew would soon discover, are expensive. The hospital bills were brutal. Even with the delivery covered by Medicaid, there were complications that required expensive medicines, additional tests. The apartment needed urgent repairs because of a leak in the ceiling of the room where Michael would sleep. Mrs. Celia had to be hospitalized for a week when her diabetes became unstable. Andrew sank into debt. Credit cards, loans, loan sharks. Every day was a desperate struggle not to sink completely, and through it all he remembered that night at the Savoy, of Richard laughing as he fell, of the cruel words, that kid was born a loser. The anger was a constant fire in Andrew's chest. Not just anger at Richard, but at the whole system. The world that allowed people like Richard to humiliate people like him without consequence. The world where being born poor was a life sentence of humiliation. But anger, by itself, changed nothing. Anger didn't pay bills. Anger didn't feed a child, so Andrew swallowed the anger, just as he swallowed everything else, and he kept working. Richard Almeida, meanwhile, had completely forgotten about Andrew. That night at the Savoy was just one among hundreds of nights in expensive restaurants, with disposable people serving him. He had humiliated so many waiters, so many employees, so many inferior people that their faces blended into an indistinct mass of irrelevance. His life continued on its superficial course. He traded Brittany for Caroline, then Caroline for Juliana. He bought a new, even more expensive apartment, traded the Porsche for the latest model, traveled to Dubai, then the Maldives, then Japan. Posted everything on Instagram, collecting likes and envy. But there was a growing crack in his perfect life. Armando Almeida was getting sicker. Pancreatic cancer, advanced stage, and the old man was starting to put his affairs in order. One Thursday afternoon, Armando called his son into his office. The room smelled of medicine and mahogany. The man who was once robust and imposing now seemed to sink into the leather armchair, his skin yellowed, his eyes sunken. "Richard, we need to talk about the company's future." "Don't worry about that now, Dad. You'll get better and—" "No, I won't." Armando cut him off, his voice still firm despite the physical weakness. "The doctors gave me 6 months tops, and I need to ensure the company I've built doesn't collapse when I'm gone." Richard felt something strange in his chest. It wasn't quite sadness for his father's impending death, it was more panic. Panic about what that meant for him. "I've been thinking a lot," Armando continued, "about what I'm leaving you, and about whether you really deserve it." "Dad, let me finish." Armando's eyes were hard. "You've never worked a real day in your life. Everything you have I gave you. And what have you done with it? Wasted it, humiliated people, lived a life empty of purpose." The words hurt, but Richard kept his mask of indifference. "I've always done what you asked." "No, you did the bare minimum so I wouldn't completely disinherit you." Armando took a deep breath, the effort visible. "But I won't leave my company, my legacy, in the hands of someone who doesn't know the value of anything. So here's the ultimatum. You have 2 years to prove to me you're capable. 2 years to learn the business for real, to show responsibility, to become a real man. If you succeed, the company is yours. If not what? If not, I sell everything and give the money to charity. You get a small percentage that will allow you to live comfortably, but not luxuriously, and you'll have to work for real for the first time in your life." The silence was heavy. Richard felt the panic turning to anger. "You can't do that." "I can and I will." Armando closed his eyes, exhausted. "Now get out, I'm tired." Richard left the office shaking with anger. How dare his father, after everything, after a lifetime of promises, just change the rules? But as the days passed, the anger gave way to realization. His father was dying, and Richard, for the first time in his life, would actually have to work or lose everything. In the following months, something strange happened. Richard began reluctantly to show up at the office every day, to actually watch meetings, to learn about profit margins, suppliers, market strategies. It was boring, frustrating, completely outside his comfort zone, but also revealing. Richard began to understand for the first time how businesses really worked, how every decision had consequences, how real people depended on those jobs to feed families, pay bills, survive. Not that this made him suddenly compassionate, no, but it planted a tiny seed of awareness that hadn't existed before. Armando Almeida died 8 months later, on a Sunday morning, surrounded by doctors and machines, but alone where it mattered. Richard was traveling in Cancun when he got the news. He returned for the funeral, which was grand and empty, full of people who knew Armando only for his fortune. The will was read on a Tuesday. As promised, Armando had left the company to Richard, but with conditions. An administrative board would oversee all major decisions for the next 5 years. Richard was the CEO on paper, but he didn't have absolute power. It was humiliating, but it was what he had. Richard took control of Almeida Automotive LLC with reluctance and resentment, but over the months something began to change. Perhaps it was the real responsibility. Perhaps it was the fact that now, for the first time, his decisions had consequences for him too. The company was in trouble. The pandemic had affected sales. Competitors were gaining market share. Richard needed to innovate or sink. It was then that he had the idea about the Savoy. 5 years had passed since that fateful night at the Savoy. 5 years that completely transformed Andrew Silver's life. The turning point came 6 months after Michael's birth. Andrew was at his lowest point, drowning in debt, working 20 hours a day, seeing no way out. That's when he found an ad online, a free business management course offered by an NGO for low-income individuals. Andrew almost didn't apply. He had no time, no energy, no hope that it would make a difference. But Maria insisted. "You always wanted this. Business administration, your own company, at least try. Just once in your life, try." So he tried. He studied from 11 at night until 1 in the morning, then slept 3 hours before waking up for his Uber shift. It was insane. It was impossible. But he did it. And something incredible happened. Andrew was brilliant. He always had been, he just never had the opportunity to show it. In the course, he immediately stood out. His ideas were creative, his analyses insightful, his dedication obvious. The course instructor, Paul Henderson, a retired businessman who worked as a volunteer, noticed Andrew's talent. After the last class, he called him aside. "Andrew, you have something special, a gift for understanding people and business. Wasting that would be a crime. Thank you, but I need to work. I have a family to support. What if I told you there's a way to do both?" Paul smiled. "I know of a scholarship program for an executive MBA. Night classes, 2 years, completely free for people like you. It's intense, difficult, but you can do it. I know you can." Andrew felt that spark, that glimmer of hope he thought he had lost. I would like that, but I don't know if... I know it's scary. I know it seems impossible, but Andrew, you're 24 years old. If you don't try now, when will you? At 50, looking back, do you want to see a life of what if? Those words echoed. Andrew accepted. The next 2 years were the most challenging of Andrew's life. Working during the day, studying at night, caring for Michael in his few free moments. Maria was his rock, his support. She took on extra jobs to compensate for the hours Andrew couldn't work. Mrs. Celia, despite her fragile health, cared for her grandson while they both worked. But Andrew graduated, with honors, the top student in his class. And then the doors began to open. First came an internship at a consulting firm, then a junior position. Andrew worked with a hunger that impressed everyone. He understood business in a way his colleagues with expensive degrees did not. Because Andrew had lived on the other side. He knew the reality of the streets, of the workers, of the people who made the world function. He rose quickly, surprisingly quickly. By 27, he was a manager. By 29, a regional director. By 30, one of the youngest executives in the company. And all that time, he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the nights at the Savoy being humiliated. He never forgot the feeling of falling on the marble floor while people laughed. He never forgot Richard's words. That kid was born a loser. Those words drove him. Every time he was tired, he remembered them and kept going. Every time he wanted to give up, they pushed him forward. The anger had turned into fuel. Michael grew up strong and happy, a bright boy with dark hair and curious eyes who loved books and dinosaurs. He attended a private school, which Andrew managed to pay for with sacrifice but with pride. He wore new clothes, had toys, had what Andrew never had, opportunity. Maria went back to school too. She studied nursing, graduated, got a job at a private hospital. The Silver family was rising, together, supporting each other. They bought a new apartment. It wasn't a mansion, but it had 2 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a living room with natural light. It was theirs, bought with sweat and determination. Andrew cried when they signed the deed. Mrs. Celia, now with more stable health due to proper treatment they could finally afford, lived with them. She cooked, cared for Michael, told stories of Andrew's childhood that made her grandson laugh. Life was good, but something was missing. An unfulfilled revenge, an unresolved injustice. Andrew had not forgotten Richard Almeida, impossible to forget. Sometimes he searched the name online, saw the photos at expensive parties, the luxury cars, the life empty of purpose but full of privilege. The anger was always there, dormant, but not dead. And then came the opportunity Andrew never imagined. His consulting firm was hired to conduct a complete audit of Almeida Automotive LLC. The company was having financial problems. The new CEO, Richard Almeida, was desperate to turn things around. The administrative board demanded an external audit before approving any major investment. When Andrew saw the company name on the briefing, His heart almost stopped. Almeida Automotive. Richard Almeida. It couldn't be a coincidence. It had to be the same man. He checked. A quick search confirmed it. CEO Richard Almeida, 47 years old, heir to his father's empire. The same man who had humiliated him 5 years ago. Andrew sat in his office chair, his hands trembling. Not from fear or insecurity like before, but from pure adrenaline. Fate or poetic justice or simply chance had delivered his tormentor directly into his hands. "I will lead this audit," Andrew told his boss, Marcus, a man in his 50s with decades of experience. "Are you sure? It's a big, complicated project. The company is in a delicate situation. It could be political?" "I'm sure." Andrew smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I have personal reasons for wanting this project." Marcus didn't ask further. Andrew was one of the firm's best executives. If he wanted the project, he would get the project. The first meeting was scheduled for a Monday. Andrew prepared meticulously, a new dark grey suit that cost an entire paycheck, but was worth every penny, a navy blue tie, Italian leather shoes, a discreet but expensive watch, perfectly cut hair, trimmed beard. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man he saw. Where was the thin, trembling waiter? Where was the young man in the mended uniform balancing trays? That man had died. In his place was Andrew Silver, Executive MBA, Director of Audit, a man who commanded respect. Michael entered the room as Andrew adjusted his tie. "Dad, you look handsome." Andrew smiled, genuinely this time. He picked up his son. "Thank you, champ. Daddy has a very important meeting today." "Are you going to win?" Andrew thought about the question. Win. What did winning mean? Humiliating Richard the same way. Destroying his company. Getting revenge. "I'm going to do what's right," Andrew answered. Sometimes doing what's right is the greatest victory of all. Michael didn't fully understand, but he hugged his father anyway. "I know you're the best, Dad." Those words, so simple and sincere, almost broke Andrew. He hugged his son tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the example he was setting for Michael, about the man he was teaching his son to be. The meeting was at 10 in the morning. Andrew arrived 15 minutes early, as always. The headquarters of Almeida Automotive was impressive, a 20-story mirrored building in the city's financial district. Everything was luxurious, from the marble lobby to the glass elevators. Andrew was greeted by Richard's executive assistant, a woman in her 30s with glasses and an efficient posture. "Mr. Silver, please, follow me. Mr. Almeida is waiting." They went up to the 20th floor, where the CEO's office was located. Double solid wood doors opened to reveal a huge room with a panoramic view of the city. There were expensive paintings on the walls, a conference table that seated 20 people, and in the back, behind an executive desk, sat Richard Almeida. He looked older, some wrinkles around the eyes, grey hairs at the temples, but he still had that air of arrogance, that posture of someone who never had to bow to anyone. Richard stood up when Andrew entered. "Mr. Silver, pleasure to meet you. I've heard great things about your work." He extended his hand, smiling politely. There was no recognition in his eyes. Zero. Nothing. Andrew was just another executive, another useful person. 5 years. 5 years since Richard had humiliated him, made him fall, called him pathetic, laughed at his unborn son, and the man didn't remember. Of course not. Andrew had been invisible to him. Less than nothing. Andrew shook his hand. Firm, professional. "Pleasure, Mr. Almeida. Thank you for having us." They sat down. Andrew's team, 3 analysts, organized documents. Richard seemed anxious, tense. It was obvious the company's situation genuinely worried him. "As you know," Andrew began, his voice firm and professional, "we've been hired by the administrative board to conduct a full audit. This includes finances, operations, human resources, market strategy. It will be an extensive process." "I understand," Richard replied. "The company is going through a difficult time. My father, he left everything in order, but the market changed. I need to innovate, but the board is resisting. This audit, if positive, could give me the green light I need." There was something different about Richard. He wasn't the same arrogant man from that night. He still had an air of superiority, yes, but there was also vulnerability, genuine concern. "Mr. Almeida," one of Andrew's analysts asked, "can we start by reviewing the last 5 years of financial statements?" "Of course." Richard signaled to his assistant, who began distributing folders. For the next 3 hours, they dove into numbers, strategies, problems. Andrew watched Richard carefully. The man knew what he was doing. Surprisingly, he understood the business. He spoke knowledgeably about margins, suppliers, market trends. This wasn't the irresponsible playboy Andrew expected to find. This was someone who for some reason had changed. But had he really changed? Or had he just learned to speak the language of business? "Mr. Shalameda," Andrew said during a break, "I'd like to visit the dealerships, speak with managers, employees, get a complete perspective." "No problem. You have full access. I'm an open book." Richard hesitated, then continued. "Look, Mr. Silver, I'll be honest. I know a lot of people think I'm just a rich kid who inherited everything, and for a long time they were right. But my father, he gave me an ultimatum before he died. Learn the business for real or lose everything. And I had to learn. It was humiliating, frustrating, but necessary." Andrew felt something strange, empathy. No, impossible, but curiosity, perhaps. "Why are you telling me this?" Andrew asked. Richard shrugged. "Because I need you to know I'm not playing around. This company, it means something now. It's not just money, it's a legacy. It's responsibility. It's 2,000 employees who depend on these decisions. I learned that the hard way." The words sounded sincere, but Andrew couldn't forget. He couldn't simply forgive. Not after everything. "We'll do our job professionally," Andrew said, keeping his tone neutral, "and the report will be honest, whatever the outcome. That's all I ask." In the following weeks, Andrew and his team dove deep into Almeida Automotive. They visited dealerships, interviewed employees, analyzed every number, every decision, and Andrew discovered something surprising. Richard had actually changed significant operations. He had implemented training programs for employees, improved working conditions, increased base salaries, created a profit-sharing plan. Even more surprising, the employees spoke well of him, not with the fear Andrew expected to find, but with genuine respect. "Mr. Richard has changed a lot since he took over," a dealership manager said. "In the beginning, he was a disaster, but he learned fast, and more importantly, he learned to listen." "Does he treat employees well?" Andrew asked. "He does. Look, he's not perfect. Sometimes he still acts superior, but compared to what he was, total change." This complicated everything. Andrew wanted to find a villain. He wanted to find the same cruel man who had humiliated him. It would be so much easier to destroy that man. But what he found was something more complex. A man who had been terrible and was trying to be better. Not perfect, not a saint, but better. And that was harder to deal with than any cruelty. Andrew came home every night mentally exhausted. Maria noticed. "What's going on? You've been acting strange." Andrew told her everything. About Richard, about that night, about how he now had power over the man who had destroyed him, about how he was confused because the villain wasn't so villainous anymore. Maria listened in silence, then held his hands. "Andrew, answer me one thing. If you destroy his company, if you get your revenge, will you sleep better at night? Will you feel more like a man? Or will you feel empty?" "I don't know," Andrew admitted. "I think you do know. You've changed, Andrew. You're not the desperate waiter trying to survive anymore. You're a successful man, with a beautiful family, a stable life. You've already won. Wouldn't the best revenge be to show him that?" Her words planted a seed, but the anger was still there, pulsing. The audit was almost complete. Andrew had all the material he needed. And he had discovered something crucial, an accounting irregularity. It wasn't fraud by Richard, but from previous management, from his father's time. But it was there, hidden, and it could be used to destroy Richard's credibility, make the board lose confidence, potentially force him to sell the company. Andrew had the weapon. The question was, would he use it? He scheduled a final meeting with Richard, just the two of them, no teams, no assistants. In the 20th floor office, with a view of the city, Andrew once thought was impossible to conquer. Richard received him with coffee. He was visibly nervous. "So, what's the verdict?" Andrew placed the report on the table. Thick, detailed, professional. "Your company is solid. The problems are market-related, not management-related. With some strategic adjustments I've outlined in the report, recovery is not only possible, but likely." Richard breathed a sigh of relief, his shoulders relaxing. "Really, that's amazing. Thank you, Mr. Silver, thank you so much." But, Andrew continued, there's something I need to show you. He opened the confidential attachment, showing the accounting irregularities. Richard paled as he read. This was from my father's time. I didn't know. I know it wasn't you, Andrew confirmed, but it's in your name now. As CEO, you're responsible. If this gets out, it could destroy everything. Richard looked up, his eyes pleading. What do I do? Andrew could have said, nothing, I'm including this in the main report. That would destroy Richard, give Andrew the revenge he had wanted so badly. But he looked at the man in front of him. He saw not the monster from 5 years ago, but an imperfect human being trying to be better. He saw someone who, like him, was carrying the weight of mistakes that weren't entirely his own. And Andrew remembered Michael's words. I know you're the best, Dad. What kind of man did he want to be? The kind who sought revenge or the kind who chose to do what was right? You fix this, Andrew said finally. Discreetly, legally. I'll give you the names of specialists who can adjust everything without raising red flags, and I'll keep this out of the main report. Richard looked at him incredulously. Why? You don't even know me. Why help me? Andrew was silent for a long moment. Then, he decided, actually, I do know you. All too well. And then Andrew told him about that night at the Savoy, about the humiliations, about the tripping, the laughter, the cruel words, about how Richard had said his son would be born a loser. With every word, Richard grew paler. The horror growing on his face was real, visceral. My God, he whispered when Andrew finished. I did that? You did. You and hundreds of others like you. To me and hundreds of others like me. Richard sank into his chair, his hands on his face. I was a monster. You were, Andrew confirmed without pity. A monster who stepped on people because you could, because they were invisible to you. How can you be helping me now, after everything I did? Andrew stood up, adjusting his jacket. Because I'm not you. I could destroy your company, your life, with a single report. And 5 years ago, I would have done it without blinking. But you know what I discovered? Revenge doesn't help me sleep better. It doesn't bring back those years of humiliation. It doesn't change anything. He walked to the window, looking down at the city. But doing what's right, being the man my son believes I am, that's worth more than any revenge. Richard was crying now, silent tears streaming down. I'm sorry. Please, I'm sorry. If I could go back in time. You can't. None of us can. But you can be better from now on. Andrew turned to face him. You've changed, Richard. I've seen it. You're not the same man. And that matters. It doesn't erase what you did, but it matters. What do I do now? You keep being better. You treat every employee, every person, with the dignity I didn't have. You use your privilege to lift others up, not to step on them. And you never ever forget that it could have been you if you had been born on the other side. It could have been you waiting tables while someone laughed. Andrew walked to the door, then stopped. Oh, and Richard, my son Michael just turned 5. He's in kindergarten at a private school, getting excellent grades, loving books about dinosaurs. He's curious, kind, brilliant. He wasn't born a loser. He was born loved. And that makes all the difference. He left without looking back, leaving Richard alone with the weight of his past choices. When Andrew got home that night, Maria saw something different in his face, a peace that hadn't been there for years. Did you forgive him? Andrew thought carefully. I didn't completely forgive. I don't know if I ever will, but I let him go. And by letting him go, I let myself go too. The anger was eating me up from the inside out. It was turning me into something I don't want to be. Michael ran to hug him. Dad, did you win the meeting? Andrew picked up his son, hugging him tightly. I did win, champ, in the most important way possible. In the months that followed, Andrew and Richard developed a strange relationship. They weren't friends, they never would be. But there was mutual respect, understanding. Richard implemented all the corrections Andrew suggested. The company not only survived, but thrived. And Richard, to his credit, never forgot the lesson. One day, 6 months later, Andrew received an invitation. The inauguration of a social program by Almeida Automotive. Full scholarships for children of low-income employees. The program's name? Project Second Chance. Andrew went to the inauguration with his family. Richard gave a speech, and Andrew noticed he mentioned, without naming directly, past mistakes and the importance of dignity. After the speech, Richard approached. Mr. Silver, "May I speak with you for a moment?" They stepped away from the event. Richard was nervous. "I wanted to thank you again, not just for helping me with the company, but for showing me who I really was." "It changed my life," Andrew nodded. "You did the hard work. I just held up the mirror. There's one more thing." Richard took an envelope from his inner jacket pocket. "I know money doesn't compensate for what I did. I know it doesn't erase anything, but this is a donation to Michael's education fund. Full value for university when the time comes. Please accept it." Andrew looked at the envelope, then at Richard. There was a time when he would have torn it up with pride, refused it with indignation. But now he thought of Michael, of the opportunities it meant. "It's not for me," Andrew said finally. "It's for him. So I accept, but not as restitution, as an investment in the future. Thank you." Richard hesitated, then extended his hand. "I'll never be able to truly apologize enough." Andrew shook his hand. "Then don't try. Just be better, for everyone who crosses your path from now on." They parted, each returning to their family. Maria held Andrew's hand. "I'm proud of you." Michael pulled his other hand. "Dad, is that man important?" "He was important," Andrew answered, "for teaching me who I didn't want to be and who I choose to be." The years continued to pass. Andrew continued to rise in his career, eventually opening his own consulting firm. Silver and Associates became a reference in business management with a focus on human value. Richard continued managing Almeida Automotive, always consulting Andrew for important decisions. The company not only survived, but became a model of corporate social responsibility. Michael grew up hearing the story of how his father turned humiliation into motivation, how he chose dignity over revenge. When he was 12, he asked, "Dad, do you regret not destroying that man when you had the chance?" Andrew, now with graying hair but eyes still bright with purpose, answered, "Son, revenge would have given me satisfaction for a few days, but choosing the right path gave me peace for the rest of my life, and there's no price for peace. But he was cruel to you. He was, and it hurt deeply. But you know what I learned? People can change. Not always, not easily, but they can. And when someone is genuinely trying to be better, destroying that person serves no purpose other than feeding our own ego." Michael hugged his father. "I want to be like you when I grow up." "No," Andrew said gently. "I want you to be better than me. Kinder, stronger, wiser. Each generation must elevate the next. That's how the world improves." When Michael was 15, Mrs. Celia passed away, peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by love. She had lived to see her grandson grow strong, her son successful, the family happy. At the funeral, Andrew spoke about how she was his inspiration, his rock, his reason to never give up. Richard showed up at the funeral. Andrew was surprised. "You didn't have to come." "I know, but I wanted to. Your mother raised an extraordinary man. I wanted to pay my respects." It was a small gesture, but significant. At 18, Michael passed the medical school entrance exam. He wanted to be a doctor, help people, make a difference. The scholarship Richard had given covered everything. When Michael learned the origin of the money, he was conflicted. "How can I accept money from him after what he did to you?" Andrew smiled. "Because people are complicated, son. They aren't just villains or heroes. They are complex human beings who make terrible mistakes and sometimes try to make up for them. That money doesn't erase what he did, but it represents his effort to be better, and you will use that money to save lives. That turns something negative into something positive." Michael understood in that moment one of the greatest lessons his father could teach, the moral complexity of the real world. 20 years after that fateful night at the Savoy, the restaurant still existed, now renovated, more modern. Andrew was invited to a networking event there. Maria went with him, beautiful in a blue dress, her hair now with silver strands she wore with pride. When they entered, Andrew paused. The last place he had been there was as a waiter. Humiliated, broken, invisible. Maria held his hand. "Are you okay?" He looked around. The same marble, the same chandeliers, but he wasn't the same man. He wore an impeccable suit, was recognized and respected, had built an empire from nothing. "I'm great," Andrew replied. "I'm proving to myself that that night didn't define me. I defined myself." During the event, Andrew was approached by several executives who knew his story of overcoming adversity. It had become legendary in the business world. From waiter to CEO, the impossible journey made possible. A young man of about 25, clearly an intern at some company, approached timidly. "Mr. Silver, sorry to bother you. I work as a waiter here to pay for college, and I heard your story. I wanted to know if you have any advice." Andrew saw himself in that young man, the tired but hopeful eyes, the humble but dignified posture. "Keep studying," Andrew said. "No matter how difficult it gets, don't give up. And when someone treats you badly, when someone makes you feel small, remember that they don't define you. You define yourself by the choices you make. And if I feel anger, the desire for revenge, you will. It's human. But don't let the anger consume you. Use it as fuel, not as destiny. Turn pain into purpose." The young man had tears in his eyes. "Thank you. Thank you so much." As he walked away, Maria whispered, "You just changed his life." "I hope so. The same way several people changed mine." At the end of the night, as they were leaving the restaurant, Andrew saw a familiar figure leaning against a car on the corner. "Richard." Andrew approached. "What are you doing here?" Richard looked older. He was 52 now, hair completely grey, a few pounds heavier, but his eyes had a depth they didn't have 20 years ago. "I knew you'd be here today, and I needed to come back to this place, where it all started, where I was a monster." "Richard, let me finish." Richard took a deep breath. "For years I tried to convince myself I had completely changed, that I was a new man. But the truth is, I still carry the weight of what I did, to you and to so many others, and nothing I do will completely erase that. You don't need to erase it. You need to learn from it. I learned. You taught me, not with anger or revenge, but with dignity." Richard wiped a tear. "I wanted you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about that night. Not with pride, but with shame. And that shame keeps me humble, reminds me to treat every person I meet with respect." Andrew was silent for a moment. "Richard, people make mistakes. Terrible mistakes sometimes. But what defines character isn't the mistake. It's what you do afterward. You could have continued being who you were, but you chose to change. And that matters. Thank you for not destroying me when you had the chance. I didn't do it for you. I did it for me, because the man I wanted to be wouldn't stoop to the level of the one who hurt me." They said goodbye with a handshake. They weren't friends. They probably never would be. But there was peace between them. And sometimes, peace is all we need. Michael graduated from medical school at 24. Andrew and Maria cried with pride at the graduation. The boy Richard said was born a loser was there in a white coat, about to save lives. At the graduation party, Michael made a toast. "To my parents, who taught me that where you come from doesn't determine where you can go. That humiliation doesn't have to break you, it can strengthen you. That dignity is priceless, I love you." Andrew held Maria, both crying. They had started with nothing, and had built everything that mattered. Years later, Andrew received a call. Richard had had a heart attack. He was in the hospital in delicate condition. He had no close family, the girlfriends had come and gone, his friends were superficial. He had asked them to call Andrew. Andrew went to the hospital. He found Richard in bed, frailer than ever, connected to machines. "You came," Richard whispered. "Of course I came. Why?" "After everything. Because 25 years ago, a man showed me the worst of humanity. And since then I've chosen to show the best I can be. That includes being here now." Richard cried. "I wasted my life. I had everything and valued nothing. You had nothing and built everything. It's not too late. You're still here. You still have time. Time for what? I have no family, no real love. I have a successful company and an empty life." Andrew held his hand. "Then change that. Now. Today. Stop living in regret and start living in the present." Richard survived the heart attack, and when he left the hospital, he made radical changes. He sold the huge apartment and moved to something smaller. He started working as a volunteer in social programs. He created a foundation for low-income youth. He used his wealth to make a real difference. He never married, never had children of his own, but he became a mentor to dozens of young people, a father figure to many who had none. And every 6 months he had dinner with Andrew and his family. Not as a close friend, but as someone who was part of the journey, the story. Michael, now a successful doctor, sometimes asked his father, "Did you ever completely forgive him?" "Forgiveness is complicated," Andrew would answer. "I don't know if I forgave everything, but I don't hold anger anymore, and that's enough for me." Andrew Silva retired at 60. He had built a successful company, raised an extraordinary son, lived a life of purpose and dignity. He and Maria traveled, finally taking the honeymoon they never had when they were young. Richard continued his social work until his final days. He died at 72, peacefully, surrounded by the young people he had helped. In his will, he left his entire fortune to the foundation, and he asked Andrew to be the chairman of the board. At Richard's funeral, Andrew gave the eulogy. Richard Almeida was not a perfect man, far from it. He made cruel mistakes that hurt people deeply, but he also chose to change. He chose to be better, and in the last 20 years of his life he used his privilege to lift others up. That doesn't erase the past, but it shows that redemption is possible, that people can change, that it's never too late to choose dignity. After the funeral, Michael said to his father, "This whole story about you and Richard is incredible. It should be a book." Andrew laughed. "Maybe one day, but it's not about me or him. It's about the lesson. How we respond to cruelty defines who we are, much more than the cruelty itself." At 75, Andrew finally wrote his memoirs, not as a self-help book or an easy success story, but as an honest testimony of pain, struggle, difficult choices, and peace earned. The book became a phenomenon, not because it was a story of epic revenge, but because it was a story of complex humanity, of a man who was humiliated and chose dignity, of another man who was cruel and chose redemption. In an interview, a reporter asked, "Mr. Silva, if you could go back to that night at the Savoy, would you change anything?" Andrew thought for a long time. The pain? Yes, I wish I hadn't felt it. But the journey it started? No. Because that night, as terrible as it was, taught me everything I needed to know about the kind of man I wanted to be. It gave me purpose. And purpose is the greatest gift we can receive, even when it comes wrapped in pain. And about Richard Almeida, was he a villain or a hero? Neither. He was human, deeply flawed, then deeply transformed. And that is more realistic, more inspiring than any villain versus hero story, because it shows that all of us, no matter how lost we are, can choose a better path. Michael, now 40 and father of 2 children, brought the kids to meet their grandfather. Andrew told them the story, adapted for their ages, about respect, dignity, choices. "Grandpa," the 7-year-old girl asked, "were you a hero?" Andrew smiled, picking her up. "No, sweetheart, I just was myself the best way I could, and sometimes that's enough." "And the bad man? Did he become good?" "He tried to become good, and trying is what matters." At 80, Andrew was on his porch, watching the sunset over the city that had once rejected him and later embraced him. Maria, now with completely white hair but eyes still green and bright, sat beside him. "Were you happy?" she asked. "Immensely. Not always, not every day, but deeply, significantly happy." "Any regrets?" Andrew thought. "Regrets? Many, but none that define me. I lived with purpose, loved completely, raised an extraordinary son, turned pain into power, chose dignity over revenge. And I will die when the time comes, knowing I was the best man I could be." "That's the best life possible," Maria said, resting her head on his shoulder. "It is, and it started on the darkest night of my life. Funny how that works, huh?" They stayed there, holding hands, as the sun set over the city, painting the sky orange and purple, a perfect picture of ending and beginning. And somewhere, in an elegant restaurant in the city, a young waiter balanced trays, dreaming of better days. And perhaps, just perhaps, his story of transformation was just beginning, because every ending is just the beginning of another journey, and every humiliation can be the seed of greatness, if we choose to cultivate it with dignity instead of watering it with bitterness. The story of Andrew Silva and Richard Almeida wasn't about revenge. It was about something much more powerful, the human capacity for transformation, the choice to be better even when the world gives us every reason to be worse, to find strength in vulnerability, purpose in pain, and peace in dignity. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. We are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we choose to respond. Andrew could have become bitter, Richard could have remained cruel, but they both chose different paths, and those choices made all the difference. Years after Andrew's death, Michael found among his belongings an old notebook. Inside, an entry dated from that fateful night at the Savoy, written with handwriting trembling from exhaustion and humiliation. Today, I was humiliated in a way I never imagined possible. A man made me feel less than nothing, laughed at my unborn son, called me pathetic, and I could do nothing but swallow it and continue. But I swear here, on this paper, this will not break me. I will use this pain. I will transform it. And one day I will prove, to myself more than to anyone, that dignity isn't in how much money you have, but in how you treat people, especially when you gain power. One day, when I have choices, I will choose to be different. I will choose to be better. I promise. Michael cried reading that. His father had kept the promise, not just for himself, but for everyone his story had touched. And in another part of the city, in a foundation room bearing Richard Almeida's name, low-income youth received scholarships, mentorship, opportunities. On the wall, a plaque with a quote Richard had chosen, "It's not where you start that matters. It's who you choose to be along the way." 2 lives, 2 journeys, 1 painful intersection that turned into lessons in humanity. And so the story of a humiliated waiter and a cruel millionaire became something greater, a testament to human complexity, the possibility of redemption, and the transformative power of dignity. Bye-bye.